The Lost Key Part 1. The Architect's Shadow. The rain in the city did not wash things clean. It merely varnished the grime, turning the cobblestones of the old quarter into slick, treacherous mirrors that reflected the neon bleeding down from the skyscrapers above. Inside the shop, however, the air was dry and smelled of beeswax, cedar shavings, and the sharp metallic tang of copper polish. Julian Mercer adjusted the magnifying loupe over his left eye, his breath held tight in his chest. The object on his workbench was small, no larger than a deck of playing cards, wrapped in oilcloth that had stiffened with age. It had arrived that morning in a crate of estate salvage from a demolished townhouse in the Silk District. A blind box, the auctioneer had called it. Julian had paid $300 for the lot, mostly for the set of Victorian drafting compasses visible at the top. But this bundle, buried beneath a layer of moth-eaten velvet, was the real prize. He peeled back the last layer of cloth. It was a key, but to call it a key was a failure of language. It was a heavy, intricate assembly of brass, silver, and a dark, matte metal that seemed to swallow the light of his desk lamp. The shaft was octagonal, etched with microscopic grooves that spiraled like DNA. The bow, the handle, was not a flat piece of metal but a spherical cage containing a gyroscope of 3 interlocking rings. "Beautiful," Julian whispered, the word feeling inadequate. He picked it up. It was denser than lead, pulling comfortably at his wrist. As his thumb brushed the spherical handle, the rings inside spun silently, reorienting themselves. It wasn't just a tool. It was a machine. Julian was a restorer of impossible things. When the city's museums found a clockwork automaton that wouldn't sing or a safe with a lock forgotten by time, they called him. He understood the language of mechanisms. He knew that every machine wanted to do one thing, work. They wanted to complete their cycle. He set the key down and picked up a specialized pick, gently probing the grooves on the shaft. There was residue here, coal dust, and trace amounts of limestone. This key hadn't been used in a safety deposit box or a jewelry chest. It had been used in the city itself. His phone buzzed on the counter, vibrating against a tin of screws. He ignored it. He was tracing the faint inscription running along the spine of the key. It was almost invisible to the naked eye, but under the loupe, the serif lettering stood out sharply. Veritas in interstitio. Truth in the space between, Julian translated. He rotated the key. On the underside, there was a series of notches that didn't look like standard biting. They looked like a skyline. He squinted. It wasn't just any skyline. It was the city, but wrong. The proportions were skewed. The central spire was too tall, the surrounding buildings too low. He grabbed a notepad and a charcoal pencil, quickly rubbing the side of the key against the paper to create a frieze of the pattern. He held it up to the light. It matched the profile of the Gilded Mile, the row of Art Deco titans built in the Roaring Twenties. But the central notch corresponded to the Vane Building, the Iron Spire. Julian's heart skipped a beat. The Vane Building was a monolith of black steel and glass, currently undergoing a controversial renovation. It had been built by Elias Vane, an eccentric industrialist who vanished in 1938. Rumors had always swirled around Vane's architecture, that he built secret rooms, that he was obsessed with occult geometry. Most historians dismissed it as urban legend. Julian looked at the heavy, shifting key in his hand. This was no legend. He checked the time. 7:45 p.m. The shop was closed. The rain was hammering against the front window. A sensible man would put the key in the safe, go upstairs to his apartment, order takeout, and research Elias Vane on the internet. Julian Mercer was a careful man, but he was not sensible. He grabbed his trench coat, slipped the heavy key into his deep inner pocket, and turned off the lights. The subway ride to the financial district was a blur of damp wool and static-filled announcements. Julian stood near the doors, one hand pressed against the pocket containing the key. It felt warm, radiating a faint heat that shouldn't have been possible for a piece of metal. He stepped out at Union Square and walked 3 blocks to the Vane Building. The rain had thinned to a cold mist that clung to his eyelashes. The building loomed ahead, a jagged silhouette cutting into the low clouds. Scaffolding hugged its lower levels like a steel corset, and keep-out signs plastered the plywood hoardings. Julian knew the layout. He had consulted on the restoration of the lobby friezes 2 years ago. He knew there was a service entrance on the eastern flank, used by the construction crews, that often had a faulty magnetic lock. He skirted the perimeter, his boots splashing in shallow puddles. The city felt different tonight. Usually, the noise of traffic and the hum of ventilation fans created a wall of sound. But tonight, the silence between the noises felt heavy, pregnant with intent. He reached the service door. It was pulled shut, but the red light on the keypad was flickering. He didn't need to hack it. He just needed to apply pressure to the bottom right corner of the frame where the strike plate was loose. He leaned his shoulder into it and pulled. With a groan of rusted hinges, it popped open. He slipped inside, the smell of wet concrete and sawdust enveloping him. The service corridor was lit by temporary string lights, casting long, swinging shadows. He moved quietly, guided by memory. The Vane building was famous for its skeletal design, steel beams on the exterior, leaving the interior vast and open. But the key had promised truth in the space between. He wasn't looking for the lobby or the executive suites. He was looking for the core. He reached the central elevator bank. The modern cars were locked down, but behind a sheet of heavy plastic tarp lay the original freight elevator. It was a caged beast of iron lattice. Julian ducked under the tarp. The call button was missing, just a hole with wires hanging out. He took out a multi-tool from his belt, stripping 2 wires and tapping them together. A spark jumped, and deep in the bowels of the building, machinery groaned. "You have a delicate touch," a voice said from the shadows behind him. Julian spun around, dropping the wires. Standing near a stack of drywall sheets was a woman. She was wearing a tailored charcoal coat that looked expensive and entirely inappropriate for a construction site. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant knot, and her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and unamused. She held a flashlight, but she didn't shine it in his face. She kept it pointed at the floor, illuminating the space between them. "The site is closed," Julian said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline spiking in his blood. "I'm a consultant, just checking the humidity levels for the plaster work." The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're Julian Mercer. You own the antiquities shop on Barrow Street. You haven't consulted for this building in 22 months. She took a step closer. "I'm Evelyn Hartwood. I believe you have something that belongs to history." Julian didn't move. "I have a lot of things, Ms. Hartwood. You'll have to be more specific." "Don't play games, Julian. The Vane key is surfaced at the auction this morning. My buyer was delayed. You picked it up for a pittance." "If you know what it is," Julian said, shifting his weight, "then you know I'm not just going to hand it over." "I don't want you to hand it over," Evelyn said, her tone softening slightly. "I want you to use it, but not alone. You have no idea what you're walking into. Elias Vane didn't build a skyscraper, he built a vault. And you're trying to crack it with a hammer when you need a stethoscope." The elevator arrived with a deafening clang. The gate rattled open. Julian looked at the open car, then back at Evelyn. "Who is your buyer?" "Someone who wants to keep that door closed," she said enigmatically. "I, however, am curious. I can help you, Mercer. I have the blueprints, the real ones, not the ones filed with the city." She reached into her bag and pulled out a roll of blue-tinted paper. She held it up. "Floor 13. It doesn't exist on the elevator panel, but it exists in the shaft." Julian hesitated. He worked alone. He trusted machines, not people. But the weight in his pocket felt heavier now, urgent. And he knew, looking at Evelyn Hartwood, that she wasn't going to call the police. She was hooked by the same mystery that had dragged him out into the rain. "Get in," Julian said. Evelyn stepped into the cage without hesitation. Julian followed, twisting the wires again. The car jerked upward. "There is no button for 13, Julian said, watching the floor numbers paint light across Evelyn's face. "The panel jumps from 12 to 14. "Superstition," Evelyn said. Or camouflage. Stop the car between floors. Julian watched the mechanism. As the car passed the 12th floor, he yanked the emergency stop lever. The elevator screeched to a halt, bouncing on its cable. The silence that followed was absolute. Now what? Julian asked. Now. Evelyn pointed to the rear wall of the elevator shaft, visible through the iron lattice. Look at the brickwork. Julian shone his flashlight. The bricks were dirty, covered in 80 years of grease. But there, right at eye level, was a small octagonal indentation in a steel plate embedded in the masonry. The keyhole, Julian breathed. You can't reach it from here, Evelyn said. The mesh is too tight. Julian looked at the gate. She was right. He couldn't get his hand through. But the key was a machine. He pulled the key from his pocket. The gyroscope in the handle was spinning faster now, creating a low hum that vibrated against his palm. Hold the light, he ordered. Evelyn directed the beam onto the steel plate. Julian examined the key. The shaft was segmented. He twisted the bottom ring of the handle. The shaft extended, telescoping out like a spyglass. It doubled in length, then tripled. Incredible, Evelyn whispered. Julian carefully threaded the extended key through the diamond-shaped gap in the elevator gate. His hand was shaking slightly. If he dropped it, the key would fall 20 stories to the basement. He guided the tip toward the indentation. It slotted in with a satisfying thunk. He tried to turn it. It wouldn't move. It's stuck, he said. No, Evelyn said, her eyes scanning the blueprints in her hand. It's not a lock. It's a winding mechanism. Push in, then turn. Julian applied pressure. The key sank an inch deeper into the wall. He turned it clockwise. The reaction was immediate. A deep, resonant boom echoed through the shaft, like a hammer striking a massive bell. The wall of the shaft didn't open. Instead, the entire elevator car shuddered. What did you do? Evelyn grabbed the railing. I unlocked the floor, Julian said. The wall in front of them, the brick wall of the shaft, began to slide downward. Behind it was not a hallway, but a foyer. A small, elegant space paneled in dark mahogany, illuminated by gas sconces that flickered to life as the air hit them. Gas lights, Evelyn murmured. They've been burning on a pilot for 80 years? Julian retracted the key and slipped it back into his pocket. The elevator gate refused to open. The safety interlocks were engaged because they were between floors. We have to climb, Julian said. He pointed to the top of the cage. There's a hatch. They scrambled up through the emergency hatch onto the roof of the elevator car. From there, it was a short jump into the open foyer of the hidden 13th floor. Julian landed on the parquet floor, dust puffing up around his boots. He reached down and helped Evelyn up. The air here was stale, smelling of ozone and old paper. The room was circular. There were no windows, only walls filled with filing cabinets and strange, brass instruments on pedestals. This isn't an apartment, Julian said, walking toward a massive desk in the center of the room. It's a control room. For the building? Evelyn asked, touching a glass globe that contained a miniature thunderstorm of static electricity. No, Julian said, for something else. He reached the desk. It was covered in maps, but not of the city as it was. These were maps of the city's underground, tunnels, aqueducts, pneumatic lines. And marked in red ink were 5 locations. One was the Vane building where they stood. Another was the central library. A third was the shipping yards. The fourth was the subway terminal. The fifth was merely a question mark in the center of the river. He was mapping the ley lines, Evelyn said, looking over his shoulder. Or the structural stress points. He was hiding things, Julian corrected. He pointed to the map. Look, this is us. The first door. Suddenly, a sound came from the elevator shaft behind them, the whine of a high-speed winch. Someone else is coming, Julian said. My buyer isn't the only one interested, Evelyn said, her face pale. We need to leave. Now. Who else knows about this? Caleb Frost, she said, the name dropping like a stone. Julian froze. Caleb Frost was a name whispered in the dark corners of the black market. An acquirer. A man who didn't restore history, he strip-mined it. If Frost was here, this wasn't an adventure anymore. It was a hunt. The elevator is the only way out, Julian said. No. Evelyn pointed to the far wall. Vane always built back doors. A heavy thud echoed from the elevator shaft. The roof of the car they had just vacated was being breached. Julian grabbed the map from the desk. Underneath it was a small, velvet-lined depression. It was empty, but the shape was unmistakable. It was shaped like a lens. We're late, Julian said. Someone took the artifact. Or Vane moved it, Evelyn said. She ran to a bookshelf and pulled a specific volume, The Architecture of Shadow. The bookcase clicked and swung inward, revealing a narrow, spiral staircase descending into darkness. Go, Julian commanded. As Evelyn ducked into the passage, Julian turned back. A figure hauled itself up from the elevator shaft into the foyer. Caleb Frost was a large man, wearing a tactical vest over a tailored suit. He wore night vision goggles pushed up on his forehead. He held a pistol with a suppressor, not pointed at Julian, but held casually at his side. Mr. Mercer. Frost's voice was smooth, like gravel and honey. You have something that makes my life very difficult. I have a lot of things. Julian repeated his line from earlier, stepping back toward the secret passage. The key, Frost said, stepping into the light of the gas sconces. Give it to me and you walk away. Keep it, and I bury you in this tomb. Julian's hand went to his pocket. He felt the gyroscope spinning wildly, agitated by the proximity of something. Frost wasn't just here for the key. Frost was wearing a ring on his left hand that glowed with the same matte black metal as the key's shaft. It's not just a key, is it? Julian said. It's a master switch, Frost smiled. And you don't know how to drive. Frost raised the gun. Julian didn't wait. He threw himself backward into the dark passage, slamming the bookcase shut just as a bullet splintered the wood where his head had been. Move! He shouted to Evelyn, who was halfway down the stairs. They scrambled down the tight metal spiral, the sound of Frost kicking at the hidden door booming above them. The stairs seemed to go down forever, winding through the interstitial spaces of the building, between the walls, between the floors. They emerged, breathless, into a utility tunnel filled with steam pipes. Where are we? Julian gasped, checking the map he had stolen. Sub-basement 4, Evelyn said, connects to the metro tunnels. They ran. The sound of pursuit was distant now, but Julian knew Frost wouldn't give up. They burst out of a maintenance door onto a subway platform. It was the old City Hall station, abandoned decades ago, its beautiful tiled arches covered in soot. Julian leaned against a pillar, his chest heaving. He pulled the key out. It was hot to the touch. He wants this, Julian said. He killed for it, probably. Evelyn adjusted her coat, regaining her composure. Caleb Frost works for a consortium that believes Vane's machine can change the city. Reshape it physically. Reshape it. Julian looked at the key, then at the map. What does that mean? Vane believed the city was a living organism, Evelyn said. He believed that if you controlled the flow of energy, water, electricity, people, you could alter reality within its borders. The key unlocks the control nodes. Julian looked at the map again. The first door, the room they had just found, was empty, but the map showed a path to the second location. The silent library. We didn't find the treasure, Julian said. We just found the instruction manual. And a very dangerous enemy, Evelyn added. She looked at him. I can disappear, Julian. I know how to hide. But you're a shopkeeper. Frost knows where you live. Julian looked at the dark tunnel stretching out before them. He thought of his quiet shop, the smell of beeswax, the ticking of repaired clocks. That life felt like a distant memory now. He looked at the key in his hand. It had stopped spinning. It was waiting. He closed his fist around it. He can come to the shop, Julian said, his voice hardening. I won't be there. Where will you be? Julian looked at the map, his finger tracing the line to the next mark. The library closes at midnight, Julian said. That gives us 2 hours. He began walking down the track, into the dark. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, then fell in step beside him. Behind them, in the distance, the maintenance door banged open, and the beam of a flashlight cut through the gloom. But Julian didn't look back. The first door was open. The city was waking up, and he was the only one holding the keys. The rain had stopped when they finally emerged from a ventilation grate in an alleyway 3 miles north. The city lights were dazzling, a canyon of glass and electricity. To anyone else, it looked like a Friday night in the metropolis. But to Julian, looking at the skyline, it looked different. He could see the seams now. He could feel the pulse of the machine beneath the pavement. He checked his pocket. The key was cool, dormant, but he knew it was just resting. Part 2, he whispered to himself. What? Evelyn asked, brushing soot from her sleeves. Nothing, Julian said. Let's go. We have a library to break into. As they merged into the crowded street, disappearing into the flow of pedestrians, the neon sign of the Vane building flickered in the distance. Once, twice, and then went dark. The game had begun.